The call came at 1:47 a.m. Jake had been half asleep, phone face down on his nightstand, buzzing so hard it nearly danced off the edge. At first he thought it was a dream. Then he saw her name flash on the screen, Elise, and suddenly he was wide awake. He answered on the second ring. Elise? Static. Then breathing. Then. Jake. I don't have long. They know. I think they know. I tried to. Crack. A muffled sound, something like splintering wood or a snapped branch. Elise, what's going on? He said, his voice hoarse. They're watching the cabin. Don't come here. Please don't. Then a low whisper, not hers. Not even human. Then nothing. The call dropped. Jake stared at his phone, heart thundering in his chest. He tried calling back. Straight to voicemail. Again. And again. Still nothing. Then he looked at the screen one last time, the location tag. A place she'd never told him about before, somewhere deep in the western pines, a place called Hollow Creek Preserve. Off-grid. Nearly unreachable. Within 20 minutes, he was in his truck, tires spinning out of the driveway, headlights cutting through fog as he sped down Route 9. They had agreed not to post about each other. No pictures. No shared check-ins. Elise said it was safer that way. Safer for her. Something about family she didn't talk about. Too controlling, she'd said. Old school weird. Jake had chalked it up to overprotective parents. But now, the road grew thinner as he drove, asphalt giving way to gravel, then dirt, then nothing but tire tracks and shadow. His GPS spun itself into confusion. Cell signal dropped. The night deepened, closing in like a fist. By the time he reached the ridge, morning light had just begun to creep over the horizon, dull and gray. A narrow logging path veered off to the left, overgrown and barely wide enough for his truck. At the end of it sat a lone cabin. Wooden, weathered, cloaked in moss and stillness. Elise's car was parked beside it. Jake killed the engine, heart racing as he stepped out. The driver's door of her car was cracked open. Her keys lay on the seat. Her jacket, the one she wore on chilly hikes, was slung across the back. And scratched into the doorframe of the cabin, subtle, but unmistakable, were symbols. Circles within circles. Twisted lines that forked like antlers. Some bled down the wood carved fresh. The wind stirred. And from somewhere deep in the trees he thought he heard chanting. Low. Rhythmic. Almost like humming. Elise? He called. Only the forest answered back. Jake stepped carefully toward the cabin, every muscle drawn tight, every sense alert. The early morning chill clawed through his flannel shirt, but he barely felt it. The silence was too perfect, unnatural, even. No birdsong. No rustling in the underbrush. Just a distant, pulsing rhythm from deep in the woods. The door to the cabin hung slightly ajar. He pushed it open with the edge of his boot. Hello? He called again. Elise? The hinges creaked like a warning. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something sour, decay, maybe, or old blood. Dust floated in slanted beams of pale light. The place wasn't lived in so much as used. A lantern sat on the table. A half-drunk cup of tea rested beside it, the liquid now cold and opaque. A sweater, Elise's, was draped over the back of the chair, sleeves twisted like she'd torn it off in a rush. On the wall near the fireplace, more of those symbols were etched into the wood. Deeper. Angrier. Some of them scorched. Jake stepped in further, boots creaking on the warped floorboards. Something about this place was off. He'd been in enough cabins to know what normal looked like. This was not it. He checked the small bedroom. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled and stained with dirt. No sign of a struggle, but no sign she'd planned to leave, either. And then, near the doorframe, he saw it. A slip of notebook paper folded and tucked into a crack in the wood. He pried it loose and opened it, his hands shaking. Jake, if you find this, they know I broke the rules. I tried to leave. I tried to tell you sooner. But they're always watching. Listening. I'm sorry. There's a path behind the cabin. Follow the stones. Past the ridge. Don't trust the lights. Don't stop. I'll wait if I can. He read it twice, heart pounding louder with each word. Don't trust the lights. A gust of wind slammed the cabin doors shut behind him. Jake flinched, adrenaline rushing, the letter crumpling slightly in his grip. Then he turned toward the back window, and saw them. Figures. At least 3. Standing just inside the tree-line. Motionless. Cloaked in black, faces obscured, like sentinels made of shadow. Watching. Jake dropped the note, grabbed the heavy lantern from the table, and slipped out the back door. The path Elise had mentioned was there, faint but visible. Worn stones pressed into the earth, leading into a tunnel of dense forest. A corridor of twisted branches and darkness. Jake didn't hesitate. He ran. The stones guided him like bones laid out in a graveyard path, half buried in dirt and roots. Jake sprinted between them, low branches slapping at his arms and face, the forest thickening with each step. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel them behind him, those watchers in the trees, gliding more than walking, soundless as they followed. The further he ran, the quieter the world became. No breeze. No rustle of squirrels or crack of twigs. Just the hammer of his heart, and the crunch of his boots on the damp forest floor. He stumbled once, nearly went down hard, but caught himself on a tree trunk slick with moss. He paused, breath ragged, and took in his surroundings. This part of the woods looked different. The trees grew closer here, trunks wide and warped like they'd been twisted by time. Strange charms dangled from branches, woven from bone, string, and feathers, swaying even though the air was still. One of them spun slowly as if tracking his movement. Jake kept moving. The path narrowed, the stones more scattered now, harder to follow. Just as panic began to rise in his throat, he spotted something ahead, a flicker of motion. Not a figure. A light. Faint. Flickering. Like a lantern bobbing through the trees. Elise's warning screamed in his head. Don't trust the lights. But what if it was her? He crept forward, slower now, ducking behind the thick trunk of a cedar. The light drifted between trees about 30 yards ahead, swaying unnaturally. No footsteps accompanied it. No sound. Just that pulsing glow, yellowish, too steady. Jake reached into his back pocket and pulled out the multi-tool Elise had given him on their second date, back when things were still playful and light. She joked he might need it if he ever followed her into the wild. He gripped it tight and whispered, "Thanks for the foreshadowing, Elise," then veered off the path to circle wide around the light. He pushed through brambles and ducked under low limbs, thorns biting into his arms. The light kept moving ahead, slow and steady. It didn't react to him. Didn't call out. As he reached a low rise, he paused and looked down into the shallow hollow beneath. There, half hidden among mossy boulders and woven branches, stood an altar. Crude. Primitive. Carved of old stone and painted with dark, dried stains. Around it, arranged in a perfect circle, were more of those symbols, cut deep into the forest floor itself, the dirt cracked and burnt. A girl stood in front of the altar. Not Elise. But wearing her clothes. Or something close. The girl turned slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes pitch black, no whites at all. Her lips curled into a grin. Then she opened her mouth, wide, too wide, and screamed. The sound wasn't human. Jake reeled backward, stumbling into a patch of bramble. Thorns raked his arms as he crashed to the ground, breath torn from his lungs. That sound, it had split the air like a blade. It echoed through the trees, vibrating in his chest, in his bones. Not a scream. Not really. More like a warning. Or a summons. The light winked out. The girl, if that's what she even was, vanished with it. One blink, and she was gone. No trace. No footfalls. Just the smell of burnt pine and something metallic lingering in the air. Jake scrambled up and ran. Branches clawed at his shirt, snagged his hair. He didn't care. He needed distance, needed space, needed something real. His legs burned. His chest felt like it would explode. He didn't stop until the path reappeared beneath his feet, stones he recognized, barely visible through the underbrush. And then, far off to the left, he heard something new. A voice. Jake! He froze. Elise? He called, breathless. Is that you? Jake, please. It came again. Faint. Strained. Human. He turned toward the sound, heart pounding. Elise! Where are you? Here, she called. Follow my voice. He broke through the trees and into a clearing. Sunlight, weak and gray, streamed through a break in the canopy, illuminating a stone well in the center. The voice came from inside it. Jake rushed forward, skidding to his knees beside the edge. Elise? And there, just at the bottom, maybe 10 feet down, he saw her. Bruised. Dirty. Her blonde hair matted to her face. Hands bound with rope. She looked up at him with wide, panicked eyes. Oh my God! He breathed. Elise. Hold on. I've got you. No! She gasped. Jake, you have to go. It's a trap there. A sound behind him. A crack of movement. Fast. Jake spun around. Too late. A figure lunged from the tree-line, slamming into him with the force of a battering ram. They both went down hard, Jake's head bouncing against the edge of the well. Stars exploded behind his eyes. His vision tilted, doubled. A scream, Elise's, rang in his ears. Then darkness. Thick. Cold. Total. Jake woke to the sharp sting of cold water slapping his face. He choked, coughing hard, blinking into blinding torchlight. His wrists were tied behind a thick wooden chair. His ankles, too. Something rough and earthy, maybe burlap, had been wrapped around his shoulders like a cloak, reeking of mildew and ash. Around him, the room swam into focus. Wooden walls. No windows. One flickering torch jammed into a metal ring on the wall, casting warped shadows. And people, 4 of them, stood in a half-circle around him, faces obscured by carved wooden masks. Antlered. Horned. Hollow-eyed. The air smelled of pine resin and something sickly sweet, like rotting flowers. One of the masked figures stepped forward. The robe it wore was darker than the rest, deep green with a hood that shimmered strangely in the torchlight, like it had been stitched from beetle shells. You were warned not to come, the figure said. The voice was low, male, but calm, measured. The Hollow does not permit outsiders. And the girl is not yours to take. She's not yours either. Jake growled, tugging hard at the ropes. Let her go. You misunderstand, the figure said gently. She belongs to the Hollow now. She has been chosen. Jake's blood turned to ice. I don't care what fairy tale you freaks believe, he spat. I'm taking her and getting the hell out of here. The masked man crouched in front of him. Behind the carved wood, Jake saw eyes that were too still. Too black. Like pits in the face of the earth. You still don't see, the man whispered. The Hollow does not take. It reveals. It draws out what you bury. What you fear. What you love most. Jake's breath caught. The man stood, turned, and gestured. 2 of the others moved aside, and from the shadows behind them, Elise was led forward. Jake's heart leapt, relief and dread warring inside him. She looked the same as she had in the well, tired, bruised, but alive. But her eyes, they shimmered strangely in the torchlight. And though her hands were still bound, she walked forward on her own. Elise? Jake said, his voice cracking. Are you okay? She looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then she said softly, You shouldn't have come, Jake. And smiled. Jake froze. That smile, it wasn't Elise's. Not really. It curled wrong at the corners, didn't touch her eyes, and carried none of the warmth he knew from stolen afternoons or sleepy morning kisses. It was hollow. Mask-like. Elise, he whispered, as if her name alone could pull her back. She stepped closer, the firelight dancing across her bruised cheek. You never listened. I told you not to come. I begged you not to. They've done something to you, he said, struggling harder against the ropes. Whatever this is, whatever they are, it isn't you. I chose this, she said. No, Jake snapped. You were taken. You called me. You were afraid. Elise looked away, something flickering in her expression, guilt, maybe. Or doubt. For a second, the mask cracked. Just a second. And then the green-robed man placed a hand gently on her shoulder. He's clinging to the old version of you. The weak one. But she's gone now. The hollow has made you pure. Elise didn't flinch under his touch. Jake's voice dropped. Elise, what's happening here? Please. She turned her eyes back to him, blue-gray, like the sky before a storm. The keepers believe I was born to complete the rite. They've been waiting for me. And now that I'm here, she took a trembling breath. The forest is waking. Jake shook his head. This is madness. One of the other masked figures approached, holding a wide, shallow bowl carved from black stone. The green-robed leader took it and held it out. Inside was water, or something like it, but dark, rippling unnaturally. Drink, he said. Jake spat at the floor. The man chuckled softly. Stubborn. But that's why the hollow called you, too. What? 2 hearts bound by defiance. She can't complete the rite alone. Your blood ties her here. Love is an anchor, Jake. And tonight we cut it. No, Jake said, voice rising. You touch her, I swear to God. But the masked figure was already moving. He pressed the bowl to Elise's lips. And she drank. Jake thrashed violently, yelling her name. Rope bit into his wrists. The chair rocked beneath him. Elise finished the bowl in 3 gulps. Her head dropped, eyes closing. And then she began to sing, a low, eerie melody in a language Jake didn't know, but felt in his bones. Outside, the wind howled. And the forest answered back. The sound that rose beyond the wooden walls wasn't mere wind. It was older. Deeper. A thrum that vibrated through the floorboards and into Jake's ribs, as if the earth itself were groaning awake after 1,000-year sleep. Elise's song grew louder, stranger. Her voice layered itself, impossibly, echoing in harmonies no single human throat should have been able to produce. Her body swayed, caught in a rhythm not her own. The torchlight dimmed, flickering with each syllable like it was afraid. And then, her eyes opened. Jake recoiled. They were black. No whites. No iris. Just a void reflecting the firelight back in fractured pieces. Elise, he whispered. His voice cracked. Please fight it. Whatever they gave you, it's not real. You're stronger than this. Her gaze locked onto his. For a flicker of a moment, something inside her seemed to recognize his voice, just the barest twitch of her mouth, the tiniest hitch in her breath. But the green-robed leader spoke again. She's nearly crossed, Jake. You should feel proud. The hollow is reborn through her. Jake shook his head slowly. No. It's using her. You're twisting her. You call it twisting, the man said, stepping closer. We call it becoming. And now, so must you. He crouched and reached behind Jake's head, pulling a pouch from beneath his cloak. The scent of earth and rot hit Jake like a slap. The man smeared something wet across Jake's forehead. It burned like acid. Jake screamed. Symbols bloomed in fire behind his eyelids, twisting antlers, spiral mazes, eyes that never blinked. The burning crawled into his skull like 1,000 spiders digging in. And then, a voice. Inside his mind. Let go. Give her up. She is no longer yours. No, Jake groaned. She's not yours either. He forced his head up, locked eyes with Elise again. Elise, remember me. A crack split the air like lightning. Elise gasped, her body jerking as if yanked by invisible wires. The black in her eyes shattered like glass, revealing blue beneath. Her voice broke mid-song. She stumbled. The bowl dropped from her hands and shattered on the wooden floor. "No!" the green-robed man shouted, lunging toward her. But Jake was already in motion. With one final twist of his body, the chair tipped, crashing to the floor. Pain flared in his shoulder. The ropes bit deep. But something snapped. And his right arm came free. Jake didn't hesitate. He rolled hard, yanking the rest of the ropes free with the momentum and raw desperation. His body screamed in protest, but adrenaline numbed the worst of it. He surged to his feet just as one of the masked figures lunged. Jake ducked low, grabbed the broken leg of the chair, and drove it upward into the attacker's gut. Wood met bone with a sickening crack. The figure crumpled with a groan, mask splitting in two. The others hesitated, just long enough. "Elise, move!" Jake shouted. She was already backing away, dazed, one hand against the wall like she couldn't quite tell what was real anymore. The green-robed leader spun, his voice like thunder. "Stop them!" Two more robed figures rushed in through the door, but Jake grabbed the torch from the wall and swung it wide, flames roaring with each arc. The robed cultists fell back. "Elise!" he barked. "Look at me!" She did. Her eyes, still flickering between black and blue, locked on his. "We're leaving. Now." She hesitated. "Jake! No more rights. No more forest. No more hollow. Just you and me." Something broke inside her at those words. Her face crumpled, and then her feet moved. They bolted together, pushing past stunned cultists. One reached for Lisa's arm. Jake knocked his hand away with the burning torch. The sleeve of the man's robe caught fire instantly, the resin-soaked fabric erupting in an orange burst. He screamed and fell back, flailing. Jake kicked the door open. Outside, the woods had changed. The trees were closer together now, leaning inward, gnarled limbs twisting into shapes that almost watched. The path they'd taken to get here was gone, swallowed by roots and thorns. The forest hummed with menace. "Which way?" Elise gasped, breathless. Jake turned in a circle. "We'll make a way." They ran. Branches clawed, roots tried to trip them, but they didn't stop. Not for the screams behind them. Not for the strange lights flickering between the trees. Not even when the forest itself seemed to whisper their names in 1,000 fractured voices. They crashed through undergrowth and into a narrow ravine, tumbling down a slope slick with moss and leaves. At the bottom, a creek shimmered, water black and fast. Jake helped Elise to her feet. Above them, distant figures gathered at the ridge, robes fluttering, antlers silhouetted against the moon. "They'll never stop," Elise whispered. Jake looked her dead in the eyes. "Then neither will I." They followed the creek. Not because it was safe, nothing in these woods was, but because it moved. It was the only thing that hadn't been swallowed up by the hollow. The current rushed like panic itself, whispering against the stones, threading through the trees like a desperate lifeline. Jake gripped Elise's hand tightly, guiding her across slick rocks and mossy banks, their steps uneven and frantic. Either of them spoke. There was no breath to spare, and every second counted. Behind them, the forest wailed. First a long, inhuman moan, rising and falling like a storm siren, then the sound of many feet, crunching in unison, fast and steady. The keepers were hunting now. And the hollow hunted with them. "They know we're off the path," Elise panted, stumbling slightly. "We've left their circle. They'll want blood for it." Jake caught her before she fell, his arms sliding around her waist. "They can want whatever they want," he growled. "They're not getting you." Lightning forked through the sky, illuminating twisted trunks and something tall and skeletal watching from across the creek. Jake didn't stop to look twice. Neither did Elise. The forest was lying to them now, trying to turn them around, trying to trick their eyes. "Bridge," Jake muttered. "What?" "There was a bridge when I came in." Off the road, maybe a half-mile down. If we can find it. Elise squeezed his hand, nodding. Then we're out. They ran harder, following the stream as the trees pressed tighter. Thorns ripped at their clothes. Something screamed in the distance, something that knew Elise's name. Jake pulled her through a narrow split in the trees. And there it was. The bridge. Wooden. Rotted. Suspended over a drop of jagged rocks and dark water. It swayed with the wind, every board groaning. They were halfway across when the chanting started again. Low. Endless. Echoing from everywhere. Jake felt it before he saw them, robed figures pouring from the woods like shadows. Dozens of them. Surrounding the bridge. Silent. Watching. Elise, Jake said, never looking back. Don't stop. They reached the other side, crashing through the brush. And then, a scream behind them. Not human. Not animal. Something else was coming. Something the keepers feared too. The hollow had been awakened. And it was angry. The trees shook. Not from wind, but from something massive moving through them, something that snapped trunks like twigs. The chanting faltered, then fractured. Some of the keepers ran. Others dropped to their knees, heads bowed, arms outstretched toward the dark. Jake didn't stop to look. Elise's hand was trembling in his, and her breath came in ragged bursts, but she kept running, one foot in front of the other. The ground beneath them trembled. I don't think they're in control anymore, Jake said, panting. They never were, Elise replied, voice tight. They just thought they were. A deafening howl erupted behind them, part wind, part voice, part something else entirely. Jake looked back just once, eyes catching a glimpse of towering antlers pushing through the trees, too high to belong to any normal creature, too twisted to be real. Between the branches, something looked at him. It had no eyes. Just holes. Deep, round, empty sockets, and in their emptiness, Jake felt known. As if the thing had peeled back his skin and read every memory, every weakness, every dream. He ripped his gaze away. Road, Elise gasped. There, it's the road. Up ahead, beyond the gnarled thicket, a sliver of gray broke the monotony of green and shadow. Asphalt. Faded, cracked, but real. Jake barreled toward it, smashing through underbrush, dragging Elise behind him. A branch snapped across his cheek, opening a line of blood, but he barely felt it. Every muscle in his body was screaming, but he only had one thought. Get her out. They burst from the trees and stumbled onto the roadside, gravel sliding beneath their boots. Jake nearly collapsed to his knees but caught himself. He turned in time to see the edge of the woods behind them, close in. The trees shifted, physically moved, twisting, curling inward to seal the gap they'd come through. The hollow was sealing itself shut. Then it was just a forest again. Silent. Still. The keepers were gone. Jake turned to Elise. Her face was pale. Her lip trembled. You're out, he said softly, voice raw. We made it. She looked at him, and for the first time that night, really smiled. A real smile. One that reached her eyes. We made it, she echoed. Jake reached up and gently touched the side of her face, brushing away a smear of dirt. They said no one leaves the hollow. Elise leaned her forehead against his. And they were wrong. They sat on the edge of the road in silence, their backs against a tree that wasn't twisted or watching, just a tree. Normal. Harmless. The sky above them was turning pale with early morning light. Birds began to sing, cautiously, like nature wasn't quite sure if it was safe yet. Jake cradled Elise against him, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand clutching his side where a sharp root had torn through his shirt. Blood soaked the flannel, but the pain was distant. Secondary. All that mattered was that she was still breathing. Her head rested against his chest. How long was I in there? I don't know, Jake said. A day, maybe two. You never told me you were going to that cabin. I didn't plan to. I thought I could sneak in, grab the journal my aunt left me, and leave before anyone noticed. Jake frowned. Journal? She nodded against him. She was one of them. A keeper. She left the Hollow years ago but never really escaped. She used to send me letters, drawings of the symbols. When she died, they sent the journal back to the woods. I couldn't let it stay there. You went back for a book? It's more than a book, Elise whispered. It's everything. Rituals, maps, names. Proof that the Hollow isn't some myth, it's a machine. A living thing. And the keepers? They're just its servants. Jake exhaled slowly, staring at the forest across the road. You should burn it. I'm going to publish it. Jake turned to her, startled. What? Elise looked up at him, eyes still tired but clear. They hide because no one believes. But if people know what's out there, maybe the Hollow loses its power. Jake searched her face, then nodded. All right. We'll make sure the world hears it. A distant rumble echoed down the road, a car, maybe. Civilization. A way out. He stood and helped her to her feet, both of them limping slightly. She leaned into him, and he didn't let go. As they started walking toward the sound, Elise asked, What if it follows us? Jake gave a faint smile. Then it picked the wrong people to chase. And behind them, for just a moment, the wind moved through the trees like a sigh of resignation. The pickup appeared like a ghost around the bend, a rusted old Ford crawling along the empty road, headlights barely cutting through the mist still clinging to the trees. Jake stepped into the center of the lane and raised a hand, trying not to look as wrecked as he felt. His face was scratched and bloodied. Elise's shirt was half torn. They looked like survivors of a war no one knew had happened. The truck slowed to a stop. The driver, a man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard and the wary eyes of someone who'd seen more than he wanted to, rolled down the window. You two okay? He asked. Jake hesitated. We got turned around hiking. Spent the night in the woods. The man's eyes flicked to the forest behind them, then back. Something in his expression hardened. He didn't ask which part of the woods. He didn't ask for more. You came out of that side? He said quietly. Jake nodded. The man's voice dropped to a murmur. Ain't much good waits past that ridge. We noticed, Elise said softly. He unlocked the passenger door. Hop in. Jake helped Elise into the cab first, then climbed in beside her. The heat blasting from the vents was like a miracle, curling around their damp skin and sore limbs. The driver didn't ask any more questions. Just eased the truck into gear and pulled back onto the road. They drove in silence for several minutes, the forest slowly thinning on either side, replaced by barbed wire fields and leaning mailboxes. Elise leaned her head against Jake's shoulder and closed her eyes. Her breathing was slow, steady. He could feel her warmth against him, real, alive here. Then the driver spoke again, his eyes on the road. Don't talk about it if you can help it. Jake looked over. Why not? You start digging, you might wake it up again. The Hollow's like that. Sometimes it lets you go. Doesn't mean it forgets. Jake stared out the window, watching the trees fall away like ghosts in the rearview mirror. She's not going back, he said. Not ever. The driver gave a single, solemn nod. I hope the Hollow agrees. They rode in silence for nearly an hour. The mist thinned, and the sky lightened to a pale, washed-out blue. Trees gave way to farmland, and then to the cracked edges of a sleepy town. Just a gas station, a diner with one truck in the lot, and a rusted green sign that read, Welcome to Hartswell. Jake had never heard of it, but it didn't matter. It wasn't the Hollow. That was all that mattered. The driver let them out at the diner, offering them a thermos of coffee from behind the seat. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't wait for thanks. Just drove off, tires crunching gravel as he vanished down the road like someone fleeing a memory. Jake held the door for Elise as they stepped inside. The diner smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee, heavenly, familiar. A bell jingled overhead, and the waitress at the counter gave them a wide-eyed once-over but said nothing as she brought over 2 mugs and a menu. They sat in the booth by the window, watching the sun finally break through the clouds. Elise traced her finger along the edge of her mug. Her eyes were clearer now. Focused. "I meant what I said in the forest," she murmured. "About the journal." Jake nodded. "You think if people read it they'll believe?" "No. I think most won't." She met his gaze. "But maybe some will. The ones who need to. The ones already hearing whispers at night. Seeing shapes in the woods." Jake took her hand across the table. "Whatever it takes. We'll get it out there." For a moment, the quiet of the diner wrapped around them. The radio crackled softly. A trucker chuckled from a nearby table. Life, continuing like nothing had happened. Elise reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn leather notebook, smaller than Jake expected, but thick, its pages yellowed and warped with time. A black ribbon trailed from the bottom, marking a place near the center. "I copied what I could before they caught me," she said. "The rest is still there." Jake stared at the journal. "You're not going back." "I'm not," she said. "But maybe, someday, someone will have to. Someone stronger. Or dumber." Jake gave a dry laugh. "We'll hope for the former." She slipped the journal into his bag. Outside, a breeze rattled the windows. And far away, deep in the forest they'd left behind, something ancient shifted. Watching. Waiting. They stayed in Hartswell for 2 days. Not because they had to, but because the silence of it healed something. Elise slept through the first night, curled against Jake in a dusty motel bed with a sputtering air conditioner and a single lamp that buzzed like a nervous fly. Jake stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for branches to tap the window. For antlers to scrape the glass. But they never came. The hollow had let them go. Or maybe it had simply let them run. On the second morning, Jake woke to find Elise on the balcony outside, wearing a borrowed hoodie and watching the fog rise off the trees in the distance. Not those trees. Not the hollow. Just pines and spruce, quiet and still. He stepped out beside her. She didn't turn, just handed him a cup of motel coffee. "I dreamed about the altar last night," she said softly. Jake stiffened. "Except it wasn't stone," she continued. "It was made of roots. Twisting and alive. Like it wanted to grow through me." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. "But you were there," she added. "And every time I started to disappear, you pulled me back." Jake didn't answer right away. He looked out at the horizon, where morning's sun carved golden shapes through the mist. "Elise," he said, "what if it's still in you? That thing?" She was quiet for a long time. "Then I'll carry it," she said finally. "But it doesn't own me. Not anymore." Later that day, they used a library computer to upload scanned pages from the journal, redacted, edited, but still strange and potent. Symbols. Maps. Warnings. They sent it to 5 reporters, 3 paranormal blogs, and 1 cryptic subreddit. Just enough to scatter the seeds. They never signed their names. Back in the truck, Elise looked at Jake as he buckled in. "You still sure?" she asked. "You could walk away. Pretend none of this happened." Jake smirked. "You really think I could pretend you didn't happen?" She smiled, leaned over, and kissed him, soft and warm, the kind of kiss that makes nightmares shrink. They pulled onto the highway, wind rushing through open windows, trees speeding past. Jake glanced once in the mirror. And for just a moment, he swore he saw antlers rising above the pines in the distance, then gone. He kept driving. They didn't go back to the city. Not right away. Instead, they drove west through hills and sleepy towns, down 2-lane roads that cut across golden fields and vanished into horizon. There was no destination, not really. Just space. Breath. The slow untangling of what the hollow had done to them. They found a campground near a lake one night. Elise insisted on building the fire herself, carefully stacking the kindling the way her aunt had taught her. Jake watched her hands, steady now. Strong again. He didn't interrupt. Just listened to the crackle and the owls and the creaking trees overhead. She sat beside him, her knees tucked under the hem of his jacket, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Do you think we'll always be looking over our shoulders?" she asked. Jake poked the fire with a stick. Sparks danced into the dark. "Maybe," he said. "But maybe looking back just proves we're still ahead of it." Elise leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I keep thinking about what the hollow showed me. That thing in the altar. I could feel it inside me, like it wanted to burn everything down just to make something new." Jake was quiet for a moment. "And what stopped it?" She smiled faintly. "You." He kissed her temple and said, "Well, I do have a habit of getting in the way of ancient woodland gods." She chuckled, soft and genuine. Later, when they lay curled in the tent, the wind began to pick up. A low hull passed over the water. Jake tensed, just for a second. But Elise found his hand and held it. "It's not them," she whispered. "Just wind." He nodded and closed his eyes, holding on to her. And yet, in the trees across the lake, just beyond the firelight, something watched. Not malevolent. Not vengeful. Just curious. The hollow didn't forget its children. But this time, it watched them go without reaching out. Without pulling them back. Because even it knew. Some roots don't break. But some hearts grow wild enough to escape anything. Even the forest. Autumn came quickly. They settled in a town called Wilder's Bluff, where the forests were tamer, and the people minded their own business. Jake took a job fixing up old cabins. Elise volunteered at the library, cataloging dusty local records, some of which made her pause longer than necessary, as if a half-remembered whisper had slipped between the lines. They didn't talk about the hollow every day. But they felt it. In the shift of wind through pine needles. In symbols scrawled on the underside of an old bridge. In the cold, sudden stares of a stranger who passed them on the sidewalk and lingered too long. They never forgot. Still, life came back. Elise kept transcribing her aunt's journal at night, turning the entries into something legible, structured. Jake helped, even when he didn't understand half of it. He'd sit beside her at the kitchen table, drinking tea, pointing out lines that made his skin crawl. Those were usually the important ones. One rainy evening, she paused over a page. "There's a name I haven't seen before," she said. Jake leaned closer. "Whose?" She traced the words with her fingertip. "The Rooted One. It says they worshipped it before the hollow even had a name. Before the keepers existed." Jake frowned. "You think that's what we saw? The thing with the antlers? Maybe. Or maybe it was just part of it." He exhaled slowly. "Great. So there's something bigger out there." Elise smirked. "Isn't there always?" Later, as they curled up on the couch with blankets and the faint sound of rain against the window, Jake looked over at her and said, "If it ever comes for us again, we fight." Elise didn't hesitate. "We burn it." And she meant it. Because surviving the hollow didn't just mean running. It meant understanding. Naming. Breaking the rules written in blood and ash. And if they ever had to go back, if someone else screamed from beneath the trees, they'd be ready. They weren't just escapees anymore. They were witnesses. And witnesses have a way of becoming something more. Winter arrived like a breath held too long, sharp, quiet, and heavy with the kind of snow that blanketed everything in silence. Elise stood in the woods behind their rental cabin, snowflakes catching in her hair as she stared at the tree line. These woods weren't the hollow, but they had a language too, if you listened. Not a threatening one. Just ancient. Tired. Whispering the old names under its breath. She closed her eyes. Somewhere deep in her chest, there was still a place where the hollow lived. It didn't claw anymore. It pulsed. Waiting. She opened her eyes and reached into her coat pocket, pulling out the tiny leather-bound field journal Jake had given her for Christmas. Its pages were half filled now with observations, theories, even drawings she remembered from dreams. Or memories. Or both. She wrote 3 words on the top of the page. Rooted 1, Origin? Hey! Jake called from the porch. You're gonna freeze solid. Elise turned, smiling. Just needed air. He handed her a steaming mug. Or maybe it needed you. She raised an eyebrow. Jake shrugged. Whatever it is. You've still got pieces of it in you, don't you? Maybe, she admitted. Does that scare you? No, she said. Because I think those pieces scare it, too. Jake gave a low whistle. Damn. You're getting poetic out here in the snow. Must be the elevation, she teased. They stood side by side for a while, watching the light fade across the trees. Then Elise said, What if we made it into a book? The whole thing. From the beginning. Jake looked at her. The journal? No, she said. Our story. He was quiet for a moment. You think people would believe it? I don't care, Elise said. I just want it to exist. Proof that we made it. That we weren't consumed. Jake smiled slowly. All right. Let's write it down. And that night, by firelight, they began. Page by page. Not to escape the hollow, but to mark the trail out of it, for someone else who might need it. Someone trapped. Someone scared. Someone with the same fire in their chest. Because the hollow doesn't keep everyone. Not when the ones who leave it take their stories with them. Weeks passed. The book grew. What started as scattered memories became chapters. Jake's point of view woven with Elisa's, each page laced with fear, rage, tenderness, and the tangled thread of love that had carried them out of something ancient and hungry. They didn't glamorize it. They didn't embellish. The Hollow didn't need help being terrifying. They titled it, The Hollow, A Survivor's Testament. Some nights they read it aloud to each other, taking turns beside the fire. And some nights, when the wind shifted and the shadows outside seemed to stretch too far, they stopped reading altogether. Just held each other. Just waited for morning. Then one day, a letter arrived. No stamp. No return address. Just a yellowed envelope slipped through the door. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, rough and textured, like it had been pulled straight from the trunk of a tree. Carved, not written, were the words. We see you. We remember. You are rooted now. Jake set the letter down like it might bite. They know. Elise didn't look surprised. She touched the edge of the parchment with a fingertip, nodding slowly. They always would. Jake's jaw tensed. You think they'll come for us? I think. Elise took a breath. I think they already did. And we made it out. That changes the rules. He looked at her. Changes them how? They're used to people breaking, she said. But we bent. We bent and snapped back and pulled each other out. And now we're not just survivors. We're proof. That scares them more than anything. Jake folded the letter in half and tossed it into the fire. Flames licked the bark paper until it curled and blackened, the words vanishing in a crackle of embers. I don't care if they remember, he said. Let them. Just means they know we're still standing. Elise leaned in, resting her head against him. We should finish the book. He nodded. And then publish it? Under pseudonyms, she said with a half-smile. Let's not get too brave. Jake grinned. Fair. Outside, a wind swept across the pines, colder than before. But this time neither of them flinched. Because the Hollow had given them something it hadn't meant to. A bond strong enough to fight back. They finished the manuscript on the first day of spring. Outside, the last snow melted in slow rivulets down the cabin roof. The forest beyond had lost its menace, or maybe Jake and Elise had simply changed what they saw in it. There were still shadows, still secrets in the undergrowth, but they no longer felt like prey. The final line of the book read, If you hear the chanting, it's not too late. Not yet. But don't go alone. And don't forget who you are. Jake hit save and backed up the file twice. Elise leaned her head against his shoulder and exhaled softly, as if she'd been holding that breath since the Hollow. It felt like finishing a map no one had ever drawn before. They printed a copy and mailed it from a post office 2 towns over. Sent it anonymously to an editor known for fringe nonfiction and cursed folk histories. Jake included a note that simply read, "You won't believe it, but someone else will." For a week, they didn't talk about the hollow. They walked the lake trails, cooked over fire pits, slept with the windows open, let normal life trickle back into their bones like clean water over stone. But on the 8th night, Jake woke up to find Elise sitting on the edge of the bed. "Elle?" he whispered. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was locked on the open window. The curtains barely moved. "Elise," he said, sitting up. "What is it?" Her voice was thin, distant. "I thought I heard it again." Jake was out of bed in an instant, heart pounding. "The chanting?" She shook her head. "No. Not that. Something else." "What?" Elise turned to him slowly, eyes tired but calm. "A girl," she said. "Calling for help." Jake froze. "From the trees," she added. "Same as me. Same voice I used?" A beat passed between them. Then Jake said, "Do we ignore it?" Elise looked down at her hands, scarred now, faintly, from rope and stone and claw. "We write back." He blinked. "What do you mean?" She stood, crossed the room to the desk, and opened her journal. Scribbled a line. Tore it free. Folded it once. Then walked to the edge of the woods behind the cabin and slipped it into the hollow of an old birch tree. Jake followed, barefoot and breathless. She turned to him and said, "If someone out there is calling for help, they deserve more than silence." And from deep in the woods, a breeze picked up. Carried the paper note away. The next morning, the note was gone. No footprints in the frost. No signs of anyone near the tree. Just the empty hollow, cold and still. Jake stared at it for a long time, arms crossed, the wind tugging at his sleeves. "You really think she'll find it?" "She already has," Elise said, stepping up beside him. Jake glanced over. "You felt it?" She nodded slowly. "The way I felt you before. When I was in there. When the hollow tried to strip everything away, there was still you. Some thread that pulled me back. She's holding on to someone too. Or something." Jake looked back at the tree, his jaw tightening. "Then let's give her more than a note." And they did. They started leaving pages from the manuscript in hidden places. Pressed between stones on trailheads. Tucked into hollow stumps. Sewn into the lining of old coats at thrift shops in towns skirting the wild woods. Not all of it. Not enough to draw the hollow's attention again. Just breadcrumbs. Warnings. If the trees begin to lean, turn back. The lights lie. Don't follow them. If they call you chosen, run. Love is the only true compass. One morning, a letter arrived in their P.O. box. Typed. No return address. It read, "I heard them whisper your names. But I heard your words too. Thank you. A wanderer." Jake stared at the page. Elise reread it 3 times. "She got out," she whispered. Jake grinned. "She will. And then she'll help the next one." Elise folded the letter neatly and placed it in the back of her journal. "We're not alone anymore." Jake stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed the side of her neck. "We never were." In the months that followed, small signs came more frequently. A faint mark on a gas station door. An antler drawn in charcoal on the side of a trailhead sign, but broken in half. And one night, as they drove through a rain-slick mountain road, a figure stepped out of the forest as they passed. Hooded. Mud-splattered. Jake stopped the truck, but by the time he looked back, the figure was gone. Elise smiled to herself. Another one made it out. The forest was changing. Not the hollow, it remained untouched, hidden behind its veils and twisting paths, but the world around it. There were ripples now. Circles spreading across the surface of something long undisturbed. The hollow had always relied on silence, on fear, on disbelief. But Jake and Elise had cracked its secrecy wide open. And others were beginning to see the cracks too. They heard whispers of a group calling themselves the Unrooted, a loose network of survivors, hikers, rangers, even former keepers who had left and lived. People who knew the truth. People who'd once been drawn toward the hollow, and turned away. And now, they were organizing. Maps were being marked. Symbols painted over. One of them sent a message through a burner email account. A single line. "You lit the fire. We'll carry it." Jake and Elise sat in their small cabin, the firelight flickering over the floorboards, the laptop screen glowing faintly. Elise read the message aloud, her voice trembling slightly, not with fear, but something deeper. Hope. Jake set his mug down. "I didn't think anyone else would care." "They do," Elise said, turning to face him. "They always would have, they just didn't know they could." They posted another chapter online that night, under pseudonyms, encrypted routes, ghosted metadata. It wasn't about fame. It was about proof. A shared thread. A lifeline. And across the country, across oceans, on dark trails and lonely paths, others picked up those words and remembered. Some began to speak aloud about the thing that watches from between the trees. Some returned to the places they swore never to walk again, with courage in one hand and a sharpened heart in the other. And others, young, angry, daring, went looking. To hunt what once hunted them. One day, Elise opened the mailbox and found a wrapped bundle. Inside, a necklace strung with small bones and pine resin. A keeper's mask, cracked down the middle, and a note that simply read, "One less." She stared at it for a long time. Then she smiled, and quietly said, "The forest isn't the only thing that remembers." Summer arrived with thunder. Storms rolled through the valley almost every night, shaking windows, swelling rivers, and washing clean the old hiking trails. Jake and Elise found themselves drawn more often to the woods, not the hollow, never that, but the edges, the in-between places where trees still grew straight and shadows didn't whisper. One evening, beneath a canopy of rain-drenched pine, Elise set a small charm into the fork of a tree. It was made from twine, a feather, and an old button, nothing sacred, nothing cursed. Just a sign. "For them to know we're still here," she said. Jake nodded beside her, resting a hand on the bark. "A boundary marker." "A beginning," Elise corrected. They no longer ran from the memories. They honored them. They carried the past, yes, but they walked forward with it, step by step. When nightmares came, they wrote them down. When fear tried to take hold, they reached for each other. And then came the knock. Late. Cold. 3 short raps on the cabin door. Jake opened it cautiously, flashlight in hand, his heart already pounding. A girl stood there, barefoot, soaked through, eyes wide with exhaustion. No older than 20. Wrapped in someone else's jacket. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. Elise stepped up behind him and gently pulled the girl inside, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You came from the hollow?" The girl nodded slowly. "It let me go." "Then you're safe now," Elise said. The girl's eyes filled with tears. "They said I'd never leave." Jake knelt beside her, his voice steady. "They were wrong." She reached into her pocket and handed Elise a scrap of torn paper. On it was a drawing, rough, sketched in charcoal. A spiral split down the middle with jagged antlers breaking from its edge. Jake recognized it instantly. Elise traced it with her finger. "Another one marked," she murmured. Jake looked at the girl. "Did you do this?" She shook her head. "No. It was already there. Someone else left it behind." And that was when Elise smiled. Not because they were safe, but because someone they'd never met had already lit the next fire. The forest was still dangerous. But it was no longer silent. By the end of that summer, the visitors came more often. A boy from Oregon, silent for the first 3 days but sketching obsessively, symbols, faces, trees with too many eyes. A woman in her 50s, eyes like broken glass, who whispered that her daughter hadn't made it out but should have. A couple from Vermont, both scarred, both strong, who said the keepers had tried to turn them against each other, but failed. Each one carried something back from the hollow, some fragment, some curse, some fire. And each one, in time, began to heal. Not all quickly. Not all completely. But enough. Jake and Elise made their home into a haven, not advertised, not public, just known. A waypoint, a quiet place to recover, a bed to sleep in, a porch to sit on when the dreams got too loud. They planted birch trees around the cabin, one for each survivor who passed through. By fall, there were 11. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Jake stood at the tree line with a lantern and a notebook. He didn't hear anything, no footsteps, no breathing, but he felt it. The forest was watching. And so he spoke. "I know you're still out there," he said quietly. "I know you think you've won because you've kept most people silent. Afraid. But they're not anymore. Not all of them." He turned the lantern out. "Let the darkness settle in. You've made a lot of keepers," Jake said into the quiet. "But you made us too. And we don't serve you. We remember. We protect. We rescue." Behind him, he heard the screen door creak open. Elise's voice. "You talking to the trees again?" Jake smiled without turning. "Someone's gotta let them know we're not going anywhere." She stepped beside him, holding 2 mugs of coffee, steam rising in the cold. "Then tell them this." "What?" "We're not just leaving the hollow." She took a sip and looked toward the dark. "We're rewriting it." And far off in the deep, the antlers stirred. Not in rage, but in recognition. The first frost came early that year. The birch leaves turned yellow overnight and fell in waves, carpeting the paths around the cabin in brittle gold. Jake raked them in quiet circles while Elise sat on the porch, flipping through the latest letter, one sent from someone in British Columbia. The writer claimed to have seen the rooted one in a reflection, not in the woods but in a river. It blinked. The letter read. Then the water ran uphill. Elise folded the page gently and looked out at the woods. "It's spreading." Jake nodded, leaning on his rake. "The hollow?" "The knowing," she said. "People are starting to recognize its edges. The spaces where it bleeds through." Jake walked up the steps, sat beside her. "And they're reaching out." "Yeah," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "It's not just us anymore." That night, a storm rolled in, carrying wind like a whispering choir. It rattled the birches, clawed at the shutters, made the fire hiss in the hearth. Elise dreamed of roots winding through her fingers, not binding her, but growing from her. Reaching. Seeking. When she woke, the room was filled with the scent of damp soil. She slipped out of bed and padded barefoot to the front door. There, on the porch, rested a bundle. Wrapped in woven reeds. Bound with deer sinew. Inside, 4 black candles. A satchel of hollowed seeds. And a scroll of birch bark, charred at the edges, with only one word etched in soot. "Ready?" Jake stood behind her in the doorway, silent, watching. "They're asking for more," Elise said. He nodded slowly. "They want to join the fight." Elise picked up the bundle, held it to her chest like something sacred. "We're not just survivors now," she said. Jake stepped forward and kissed her temple. "We're leaders." Outside, in the still woods beyond the trail, a distant call echoed, not a scream, not a threat. A signal. Answering. The hollow had been a prison. But from its shadow, something stronger was rising. A resistance. A legacy. And for the first time in 100 years, the forest was no longer theirs alone. Snow fell again the next week, soft and slow, drifting down like ash from a quiet sky. Elise stood at the tree-lean with a lantern in one hand and a strip of fabric in the other. She tied it to the branch of the youngest birch, the 12th now, fluttering pale against the white. "She made it out last night," she said when Jake joined her. "The girl from Tennessee. She sent a photo of the spiral burned into a barn wall. Still glowing." Her message said, "I followed the words and didn't fall asleep." Jake smiled. Smart girl. They walked back to the cabin in silence, snow crunching beneath their boots. Inside, the fireplace glowed steadily, and the long corkboard behind the kitchen table had filled. Thread lines. Pins. Photos. Pages torn from journals, all connected in a web that had grown from something personal into something vast. A map, not of the hollow itself, but of those who'd survived it. Escaped it. Changed it. There were dozens now. Some who still couldn't speak. Others who wrote poetry in trembling hands. One who sent a single blank postcard every month with an antler drawn in graphite on the back. Elise called them the ghost net. People the hollow hadn't broken. People who carried something forward without ever needing to explain it. Jake tacked the newest note beside the spiral barn. Elise pulled the box of wax-sealed envelopes from the shelf. "We need to send a new round," she said. "The solstice is coming. That's when the hollow sings loudest." Jake nodded. "We'll give them fire to answer with." They worked through the night. Packaging charms, rewritten rites, protections twisted out of old keeper rituals but turned backward, corrupted in their favor. No gods invoked. No devotion demanded. Just resistance. By dawn, they stood before the fire pit outside and whispered a name neither of them had said since they left the hollow. Not as a threat. Not as an invitation. But as a warning. "Elise," Jake said quietly, "what happens when this gets big? When we aren't the only ones organizing anymore?" She looked up at the pale morning sky. "Then we let go," she said. "And trust that what we started doesn't need us to finish it." And in the trees beyond their reach, the wind carried the message onward. Spring arrived late, crawling in like a cautious animal. The snow melted in reluctant patches, exposing the black soil beneath, the kind that remembers things. Roots pushed up new life through it. Not twisted. Not wrong. Just watchful. Jake and Elise took their time planting this year. Not crops. Not flowers. Markers. 12 birch saplings now ringed the clearing. One for each survivor who had passed through. One for each victory, no matter how fragile. The trees grew fast here. The soil didn't just remember, it nourished. A consequence of the hollow's lingering breath, maybe. But this time, it was on their side. Elise knelt at the base of the 13th spot, placing her hand into the earth. She held a seed in her palm, a black one, slightly warm to the touch. From the girl who had vanished in Montana. Her final message had been only 3 words. "Plant me anyway." So Elise did. Jake stood beside her, quiet, reverent. "She's part of it now," Elise said. "She always was." Inside, the manuscript had grown to over 600 pages. No longer just a record. It had become a manual. A warning. A declaration. Survivors had begun submitting chapters of their own. Testimonies. Maps of unnatural crossings. Descriptions of creatures only half glimpsed. They called the collective work the Hollow's Edge. One small press had agreed to publish it, quietly, under a folklore imprint known for printing things no one else dared. First 1,000 copies. Then more. It spread. Not in bookstores, but in rangers' stations. Campgrounds. On message boards scrawled across town hall bulletin boards. On scraps tucked into hikers' logs. Jake received a photo one night, no name attached. A copy of the Hollow's Edge, sitting on a wooden stool inside what looked like an old bus-turned shelter. In the background, a knife. A compass. A campfire glowing in the distance. The caption read, "Page 243 saved me." Jake showed it to Elise. She didn't cry. But she closed her eyes and whispered something soft. A promise. Or maybe a prayer. Not to the hollow. But to those still finding their way out. Years passed. The world didn't change overnight, but it shifted. Quietly. Deliberately. Like roots pressing through stone, slow but unstoppable. There were still disappearances. Strange sightings. Wild stories whispered by firelight. The hollow was not gone. It would never be gone. Some things are too old to kill, too deep to bury. But it was no longer a secret. Thanks to Jake and Elise, and those who followed them, there were now paths out of the woods. Not easy ones. Not straight. But real. They aged gently in their cabin by the birch ring. Their hair grayed. Their scars faded. But the bond between them only grew stronger, forged in fire and shadow and the refusal to give up. Sometimes survivors still came. Sometimes letters arrived with no return address, smudged pages, torn edges, names scratched out. Sometimes the stories were unfinished. But that was okay. Because now there were others to finish them. The hollow had keepers. But now the world had watchers. Guides. Guardians of the edge. On the last night of autumn, Jake and Elise sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, their hands entwined as the stars pierced the clouds. "Do you regret it?" Jake asked softly. "Which part?" "Going after you. Into all that madness." Elise looked at him, eyes shining with the same light they held all those years ago in the well. "No," she said. "You didn't just come after me. You remade me." He smiled. "We remade each other." She rested her head on his shoulder. "And we gave them a chance. The ones who never had one before." From the woods, a soft rustle. Not sinister. Not strange. Just life. Moving forward. Jake looked out over the trees, the birches glowing pale in the moonlight. "They say no one leaves the keepers of the hollow," he murmured. Elise's hand tightened in his. "Let them keep saying it," she said. "We know better." And the wind moved through the trees like breath. Not warning. Not threat. But acknowledgement. The hollow would remember them. And so would the ones who made it out. Together. Alive. Free. The end.